Hello, you have found Why We Are Christians, a conversational interview TV show in which I or my husband interview and speak with people who have come to faith in Jesus. They're Christians and they have very interesting stories. And this is the second half of an interview with a person of very long-standing interest of mine, because he is from an organization that we will talk about later in this show. And his name is Rob Wertheim. Welcome again, Rob. I'm just pleased to have you here, just tickled pink, tickled almost red. And we had a little bit of a cliffhanger in our last segment, and that is that most of your family, Jewish, definitely not thinking that Jesus was the Messiah,
Right.
much earlier than what we had been talking about, but most of your family had very interestingly come to faith. And I would like to have you tell us kind of the last sequence of events that got us to this place.
Sure. Well, I had mentioned that my brother had come to believe in Yeshua and Jesus. Then my father committed his life to the Lord. Then I committed my life to the Lord. And we like to say my mother was the last holdout.
Holdout, yes.
See, her parents were still living. They were older. My grandfather had heart issues. And the very possibility that my mom would believe, as we did, and her parents would find out, my mother was worried my grandfather would have a heart attack and die. And she was really concerned about all of this. So she didn't say anything to them. And she continued to come to the Bible studies with us. And my father and I, being enthusiastic about our new faith in Yeshua, we wanted my mother to believe also. So we started pushing her.
Just an interruption. You just said this word, Yeshua. For those who don't know what that is?
Yeshua is a Jewish way to say Jesus.
Okay.
That's his Hebrew name.
Yes. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thanks. Go on.
And so we pushed, and what we ended up doing was we pushed her away. She had stopped after a while coming to Bible studies. By this point, we had been going to an evangelical church, and she had been attending with us, and she stopped attending. And then somebody said to us, you know what? Don't push her anymore. Start praying for her.
Ah.
So my father and I started to pray for my mother, and gradually she started coming back to the Bible studies. And then one weekend, there was a movie showing at the church that we attended in New York called The Hiding Place, which is on the life of Corrie ten Boom,
Yes.
who was not Jewish, but a Christian. And she was willing, with her sister, to be taken into a concentration camp as a prisoner because they hid Jewish people in Holland, I believe it was. And so we watched the video, the movie, and my mother came. She watched the movie as well. And for the first time in her life, she realized there were truly Christians who loved Jewish people and who were willing even to die for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that made a real impact in my mother. Then she started coming back to the Jews for Jesus Bible studies.
Okay.
And one night, the study was on the prophet Isaiah, the 53rd chapter.
Yes, and of course, for people who are not, super Bible literate, it is a chapter that is completely sounding just like what Jesus was and did, and how he died and why he died. And I know that in our synagogues and temples in Judaism, they skip over it. They don't like it read. They don't like it studied because it is so obvious.
Mm-hmm. And so we're studying that, and at the very end of the study, there is a challenge given to everybody at the study for those who were not believers, if they would be open to commit their life to Yeshua. And my mom could no longer resist.
Yes.
She knew it was true.
Yes.
And she said she wanted to receive him into her heart as well.
Yes.
And so over the space of a year in 1975, my brother, my father, myself, and my mother came to believe in Yeshua as the Messiah.
Praise God. Praise God.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's kind of the big thing. That's the big, this is settled thing. And of course now life goes on, and you have other family members that we want to hear what their reactions were. We'd like to hear kind of how your life, you're my guest, how did your life change as a result of your coming to faith and the rest of your family coming to faith?
Okay. Well, for one thing, I was going at the time when I came to faith to the High School of Performing Arts in New York. And if anybody is old enough like me to remember the program Fame, or the movie Fame,
right.
That was my school.
Yes.
And so I used to get to school early in Manhattan. I used to sit in a classroom that was empty before class started and read my Bible. And my Jewish friends often saw me reading the Bible, and they asked what you were doing, and I would tell them that I was a believer in Jesus. And so a number of them were very standoffish about my faith.
Sure.
But I couldn't resist. I had to tell them the truth. It's kind of like when you go to a good restaurant, okay, and you enjoy the food.
Yes.
Are you going to keep it to yourself, or are you going to tell your family and your friends?
Of course.
So that they can enjoy it.
Yes.
And so I shared then. And then I graduated high school, and I went to music camp because I was a musician.
And what instrument did you play?
I play the viola, which is a little larger than a violin,
right.
Smaller than a cello.
Much smaller than a cello.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And I went to camp, and I met this fellow at camp who was also Jewish, and I had the chance to share with him about my faith in Yeshua, and he actually committed his life to the Lord as well that summer in 1976.
So here you are, a budding evangelist, and and it does something to you to see God working through you to bring somebody else to faith. It must have given you some kind of clue about, gee, maybe this would be something that you would do well.
Well, it's interesting you say that. The branch leader of the New York office offered for me to go to a Christian college. He suggested that I apply to Nyack College in New York. And I wouldn't hear of it, and I wanted to go to a secular school that had a reputation. So I wasn't going to go.
Yeah.
I decided to go to Brooklyn College instead.
So you still had your eyes set on a professional music career.
Correct. But it's interesting because I started going to Brooklyn College, and then in the fall of the summer of 1978, I went to Israel, and I stayed on a kibbutz for a couple of months. Now, mind you, I was only a believer for about barely 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so people were concerned, you're going to go to Israel, you're going to live on a kibbutz, you're not going to know anybody else that's Jewish and believes like you. And you're really risking your life, you know what I mean, and your faith, basically. Well, I just felt like I wanted to do that. So my parents brought me to the airport, JFK, waiting for my flight. Back then, it was before 9/11, so they were able to go to the gate with me.
Right.
And you know how parents are sometimes, Jewish parents, especially when they know their son is introverted. They started talking to somebody else that was going to Israel. And then the next thing you know, they're introducing him to me.
Right. Keep my son company.
And so I got to meet this fellow, David. And so when we flew over to Israel, I met him once on the plane. I looked for him. We got to Israel. I found out that he was going to be on the same kibbutz as me. I mean, what are the chances?
Yeah, right. Wow.
There was a group of people going to 3 different kibbutzim in Israel. He was from Tennessee. Southern drawl, thick Southern drawl, Jewish.
And you not.
And me not. And he ended up on the same kibbutz as me, right next door.
Oh, goody.
Well, we had dinner that first night, and we started talking about the Bible. Then we started talking about the Messiah. And then the conversation started to get interesting when we started talking about Isaiah. So I said to David, you know what, David? I think we should go for a walk. And so David and I went for a walk, and guess what I found out? David was also a Jewish believer in Yeshua.
So you guys hadn't broached that subject before?
No. And so interestingly enough, of the 100 people perhaps that were going to the 3 kibbutzim that were going to be divided up, David ends up on the same kibbutz as me from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He ends up next door to me where I'm staying for 7 weeks.
Right.
We end up working out in the fields together.
Yeah.
And he ends up being a Jewish believer like me.
And so you strengthened one another. You supported one another.
Yes.
That's
and
lovely.
not only that, but we also started sharing our faith with people on the kibbutz.
Now, did that get you in trouble?
No.
Not a bit.
It didn't.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
So we had the chance to share our faith with different people on the kibbutz, and they were somewhat open to talking with us. And so God even used that situation for me as well. I could tell that
He's
was
good.
God.
He's very good.
God's fingerprints in the whole thing.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's impossible for his fingerprints not to be on our story, the pages of our story, because it's about him.
Yes.
Right.
All about him.
All about him. Thank him. So now you're coming back, I assume, from this trip to Israel.
Right.
Did you get into the school you wanted to go to?
Well, I was already going to Brooklyn College. I got my degree in 1980, my bachelor's science in music.
Okay.
Then I went on to the Manhattan School of Music, where I got my master's degree in music performance. And I was hoping to do orchestra, to be an orchestra player. But I kind of gave up on that because I knew the people that were also auditioning. And I didn't know that I was as good as some of the other people.
Well, you mean you assumed you were not?
I assumed I wasn't.
Okay.
Correct.
So that leaves you then open to something else. So what came next?
Okay. Well, after I graduated from my master's program, I met my beautiful wife.
Oh, where?
Sandy. I met her in San Francisco.
Oh.
Now, the reason is my brother by this point and my sister-in-law were with Jews for Jesus in the headquarters office.
Okay.
And we were vacationing, my parents and I.
And headquarters means in San Francisco?
In San Francisco.
Okay, very good.
So my parents and I were visiting my brother for Thanksgiving vacation. I got to meet Sandy, and we had a long-distance relationship. I was in New York, she was in San Francisco, and 3 years later we married. And so that brings us to 1981.
Yes.
And we lived in New York. In 1985, we moved to California. Not for music, not for ministry. Just I had had enough of New York City.
Yeah.
I was 27 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And back then, there was still a lot of crime and a lot of dirt, everything. Sandy was from a smaller area in Illinois.
Okay.
And she didn't like New York either.
No.
So we moved to California,
Good
got
for you.
a job transfer. And then 3 years later, my brother approached me, or he had someone from Jews for Jesus approach me to consider whether I would be interested in applying for staff. And it was, between my wife and I, it was a pretty interesting agreement. It's a conversation.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I applied for staff. And I don't know if I mentioned that Sandy is also Jewish and believes in Yeshua.
Did you have some reservations about joining, not necessarily Jews for Jesus specifically, but a missionary organization to be on staff, meaning you were going to be a missionary in a rather official sense?
Well, the way I was approached about it was I would have the opportunity to share about the hope that lies in me, my faith in him. So the idea of talking with folks about something that had eternal value was, to me, much more exciting than selling liquid
paper. Yes. As useful as it is.
As useful as it is. And so I actually, when I was asked and we prayed and we considered the possibility, Sandy encouraged me at that point to apply. She said, I'm all behind you.
Okay.
And if that's what you feel God is calling you to do, then I'm with you.
Good.
And that was in 1988. And I've been on staff with Jews for Jesus now for the last 31 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, if you remember, I had mentioned that when I was a new believer, I was encouraged to go to a Christian college.
Okay, now.
And I said, I don't want to do that. I want to pursue music. That's my goal. And I would like to say that I was kind of in the wilderness for 13 years because God showed me in different ways through that camp situation and through where I witnessed to that fellow and he came to faith. And then after that, in Israel, the opportunity I had. After that, that here in 1988, I have an opportunity now to share about Yeshua.
Yes.
And so that was a confirmation in a sense. That's where God wanted me to be.
Where did it go? And what about kind of other members of your family? You had children somewhere in here.
Right. Well, we have 3 grown children now. But back then, when I applied for staff, I was supposed to go for an interview in San Francisco. And by this point, we were living in Ventura, Southern California.
Yeah.
Sandy was expecting our second child.
Okay.
She was due any minute. And I was supposed to go up to San Francisco. And I was offered the opportunity just to be interviewed by phone. But I really felt like I wanted to be there in person to be interviewed. And in the meantime, Sandy had our daughter, Rose, and I flew up to San Francisco, was interviewed, then I was accepted on our staff. And then a few years later, our youngest son was born, Josh. And, you know, we raised them to know their Jewish heritage,
Yes.
but also to know who the Jewish Messiah is. And each in their own time, each of them committed their life to him. Yeah.
Praise God.
Yeah.
So now when I met you, really you had left Southern California and you were now coming up to be full-time in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Right.
How did that happen?
Well, actually, my ministry started, like I said, in 1988. So for 19 years, I served with Jews for Jesus, both in Los Angeles, Orange County, led our work down in
Oh,
Orange
okay.
County.
That's a long time. I didn't realize it was so long down there.
And then in 2007, I was offered the opportunity to lead the local San Francisco missionary work. And so I came up and did that. And all along, I suppose, people maybe are wondering, what does that look like anyway, as far as what is a missionary, right?
Oh, yeah. What is
What did
a
do?
missionary?
Well, what I
In this
do,
context.
right, what I do is I meet with Jewish people who are seekers, who are open to considering the possibility that maybe Yeshua is a Jewish Messiah. And I will meet with them individually and look at the Bible with them, look at the Tanakh, the Old Testament, Jewish scriptures, as well as the New Testament. I'll also meet with Jewish people who are already believers that want to grow
So
in their
discipleship.
faith. Discipleship, that's correct. So I do that. Another thing I do quite a bit now is I attend different kinds of events, Jewish events, so that I'm able to fit in with the Jewish community a little bit more because I'm Jewish, of course.
And you don't stop being Jewish because you believe in the Jewish Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus.
Exactly. Contrary to what religious officials might tell you. And so I often will go to classes, I'll go to Torah studies, and over the course of the last 2 years, I've gotten to know different Jewish people that I've shared with that I'm a believer in Yeshua and that I'm Jewish, and then they might ask me why. And so we will get together for coffee and we'll talk about it. And then if they're interested and they're open to meeting again, we'll look at the scriptures together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do people find you, or you find the people that you're talking about who are Jewish seekers?
Well, there are different ways. One of the ways is that there are a lot of Gentile Christians, in other words, non-Jewish Christians, who love the Lord, who love the Jewish people, who might have friends,
Yes.
or maybe relatives, maybe they have a relative that's married into a
Yes.
Jewish family, and sometimes they will share the names and information of those friends or relatives, and we follow up with those folks. Other ways, one way that I'm doing quite a bit now, besides going to different kinds of classes and all Jewish classes, is I do a lot on the internet. We have a webpage. It's jewsforjesus.org.
Okay, and probably about right now we're showing that on the screen somewhere.
Okay.
Very good.
And what I do very often is I will be at our website, and we have something called live chat.
Live chat.
Obviously,
Yes.
if somebody is Jewish and they're even curious,
Yes.
there can sometimes be peer pressure from family, Jewish family or friends,
Yes.
that they don't want to tell about their curiosity. They'd rather be anonymous.
Sure.
So they'll come to our website, and then it's kind of like paying your PG&E bill or your AT&T bill, and you go online, and there's a pop-up window.
Yes.
Can we help you?
Can we help you? Yes, right.
Well, Jews for Jesus does
has that too. Okay.
And so very often I will interact with Jewish people online, and if I sense that they are open to talking more, and by the way, the internet is international, right?
Yes. So you sometimes speaking or chatting online with
People across the country, like North Carolina, like Florida, and then Brazil,
yes.
Israel, Europe. And so there are a number of people now that I meet with regularly that don't even live in the Bay Area.
I mean, do they have to type in English, or is it translated, or
Well,
how does that work?
generally, once we've connected, and they usually type English, and I type English back.
Globish.
If they seem open, we set up something, maybe initially a phone call, and then from there, we have what we call video messaging. So we use Facebook Messenger or Skype so that I can actually see the person.
Oh,
they
good.
can see me.
Good.
And
yeah.
I actually meet with the person as if they're in the same room.
Right. Well,
It's
we
just-
sometimes interview people here on this show via Skype.
Yeah,
And they're like, we're going to do somebody next month who's in Germany.
there you go.
There we go.
Except for one thing. It's not an interview. It's a Bible study
It's a
that I'll
Bible
have
study.
with somebody
Yes, it's not an interview.
that might be 5,000 miles away.
You know, we have a couple minutes left, and I would like to hear what you think is the best part. I mean, there's some obvious answers you can give, but is there something about these 31 years of being a missionary with Jews for Jesus that you would just, love to pass on to whomever you could if it was a gift you could give?
Can you clarify that maybe a little bit?
I guess a way to boil that down is kind of what the proverbial, what's your favorite thing about being a missionary with Jews for Jesus?
Oh, okay. Well, last year I was a part of an outreach that our ministry had in Jerusalem.
Oh, wow.
It was exciting.
You mean they let that happen over there?
Yes. Evangelism is legal in Israel. The law says you're not supposed to offend a Jewish person or offer material inducement to change one's religious feelings or
Okay.
religious beliefs.
Okay.
Evangelism is not that at all.
No, it isn't.
It's sharing good news
Yes.
about Yeshua. So I was a part of a team in Jerusalem that primarily was going to be speaking with English speakers who are expatriates from English-speaking countries that have moved to Israel, that speak English but are Israelis. And over the course of a month, I got to speak with probably between 60 and 70 Israelis. And interestingly enough, there were probably a handful that actually spoke English that were from other countries. Most of them were Sabras, in other words, native-born Israelis who speak English well, and I was able to share about Yeshua with them.
That's fabulous. Being able to witness to actual Israeli Jews is kind of the peak of things. And guess what? We have run out of time. Oh. So I'm going to have to just say this has been great. Thank you so much for coming, Rob. It's been a long time in coming, and your story is fascinating, and I wish you all the best in the years to come, that you might continue to be a spokesman for Yeshua, Jesus, and for the plan of salvation that God has even for the Jewish people.
Thank you very much, Katie, for having me too.
This is the end of our second part of the interview with Rob Wertheim. We hope that you have enjoyed what you've heard, and until next time, so long.